And welcome to the first episode of Season 10 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray.
Big news, Graham.
Oh, what's that, Ray?
I'm delighted to say that this episode is sponsored.
That is brilliant, Ray. So, who is sponsoring this episode?
It's Deep Pool, Graham. As a fund manager, keeping track of individual investors across multiple countries, each with their own laws and regulatory frameworks, is not only incredibly challenging and time-consuming, it's downright dangerous.
Oh, you don't have to tell me that, Ray.
No, and it's why bad actors can continue to operate in the dark. But with a product by Deep Pool called Cure, K-U-R-E, you can put all relevant information from any system in the world into a single point, a single global investor record, so that your institution isn't at risk of the damage they cause.
Well, that sounds very interesting, Ray. How can people find out more?
Well, save yourself from risk as well as complexity and wasting time by going to deep-pool.com.
Okay, so that's deep and then a hyphen, not the word, but a hyphen, pool.com. Is that right, Ray?
Yep,
right,
that's the one.
I will certainly be doing that.
Righty-ho. And to celebrate the launch of Season 10, we're happy to report that with the addition of our wonderful new sponsor, we've secured the future of the podcast for the foreseeable future.
Yes, not that we would ever want to stop, but it has become more and more difficult for us to allow enough time to provide you, listeners, with a quality product while still trying to secure and survive our business in this post-COVID economy. So I have to tell you, this is simply a great result all round.
And what are we going to talk about to celebrate this brave new world, Graham?
VAT, Ray.
VAT, really? Might that not be rather a dry subject for such a celebratory episode?
Well, you might think so, Ray, but as it happens, we have the most extraordinary story to bring to you, our listeners.
Well, now I'm interested. Where does our story begin, Graham?
At Companies House, Ray.
Now, Graham, I know you love talking about Companies House, but many of our listeners will know that VAT is the responsibility of the UK's HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs.
Oh, well done for remembering the his, Ray.
Thank you. I'm gradually getting there, although it's still a little unnatural.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but in answer to your question, the reason that Companies House is the start of the story is it was there that I discovered a whole host of UK companies being incorporated here in the UK and using various rather remote farmhouses in Wales for their registration addresses.
And did they also register to the same address for VAT?
I have absolutely no idea, Ray.
Then how's that the start of the story?
Well, it's a good question. So I was asked by the team at X-Ray, which is a BBC Wales consumer affairs programme, if I knew of any interesting stories about potentially fake companies, as we'd previously done a story with them a few months ago, which had provoked a very strong response.
So you told them about the remote farmhouse Chinese companies, right?
I did. One of them was located in Haverfordwest, out near the Pembroke coast on the very western edge of Wales, which to them, and probably to most people, seems so bizarre that it made for quite a compelling story, especially as the owner of the farm had no idea what was going on, but he was happy to talk to camera.
And we know that's not always the case, don't we?
Well, we do, and sadly, but not entirely unexpectedly, many stories never really get an airing because the unsuspecting victims aren't prepared to go on the record about what's happened to them.
But in this case, he was prepared, obviously.
He did, and the programme was subsequently broadcast.
And what happened then?
Well, a couple of days later, a chap called Dylan got in touch to say that he had received more than 4,000 letters in the last 3 months.
Now, as I understand it, the initial perception was that these letters were from Companies House relating to new company registrations, but that turned out not to be the case, didn't it?
It certainly did. It turned out they were from, as we previously mentioned, HMRC.
Now, at this point, Graham, I think we should briefly explain for the benefit of non-UK or just our general audience listeners who exactly HMRC are, along with what VAT is.
Well, Ray, we know you're our technical wizard, so away you go.
Right then, so HMRC is the UK's tax, payments and customs authority. That means they collect all of the different taxes, both direct taxes like income tax and indirect like value added tax, on behalf of the government.
Well, now that sounds like quite a big job, Ray. So how many people work there?
That's a really good question, Graham. It's one of the UK's largest employers with over 66,000 on the payroll currently.
Wow. So they collect their own tax and national insurance payments as well as everyone else's. Then.
Well, you'd certainly hope so.
Yeah. And VAT?
Well, VAT, or value-added tax, is a tax that's added to most, but not all, products and services sold in the UK by VAT-registered businesses.
Okay, so VAT-registered businesses. Now, what's the requirement then for a business to register?
Well, you must register if your turnover exceeds £85,000 a year, but you can also choose to register if your turnover is below that figure.
And why would you choose to do that?
Well, VAT is composed of two elements, Graham. Input tax, which is the amount you pay for your materials and so on, and output tax, which is what you charge on the finished product or service. You effectively pay the difference between the two to HMRC.
Okay, so if I've got you right, if your input tax was higher than your output tax, you would actually receive a refund of the difference.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it can be very common, particularly for startups, but also for businesses whose sales are cyclical, that there will be times when that's exactly the case. However, you can only do that if you are VAT registered.
Okay, I've got it, and it now makes sense. So thank you for that, Ray. Shall we then return to our story?
Well, I think we should.
Good. So if you recall, Dylan got in touch with the BBC after our story was broadcast to say he'd received more than 4,000 letters from HMRC in relation to VAT.
I'm guessing they didn't all relate to his own company then.
Well, Ray didn't even have a company. He wasn't registered for VAT at all.
So why is he getting all these letters then?
Well, that is exactly the question I was asked after he contacted the BBC.
And?
Well, it rapidly became apparent that they were related to Chinese companies.
The same ones registered to remote farmhouses?
Well, no, Ray. These were Chinese registered companies. I mean, companies registered by Chinese in China, actually mainly in Shenzhen.
You mean these companies were actually created and registered in mainland China and weren't on the UK register at all?
That is exactly what I mean.
Why were they registering for VAT then?
Because they were selling goods here in the UK.
Oh, I imagine on the likes of Amazon and other third-party platforms, right?
That's exactly right.
And they were registering using this random address of some chap in Wales.
Yeah, he actually lived in an apartment in a block of flats in Cardiff.
Now, there's so much to unpick there, Graham, but before we delve into the why, can we start with the how many?
Around 11,000 companies, Ray.
Did you just say 11,000 companies? Is that right?
That was the figure provided by the Permanent Secretary to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs in evidence to the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee.
And to be clear, the Permanent Secretary is effectively the person in overall charge of the entire organisation.
He is. So I think we can say with some confidence that the figure we've just quoted is correct.
Well, yeah, I'm convinced. But how can it be that 11,000 companies are allowed to register to some poor private individual's address with impunity?
I think that's a really good question, Ray. And Mr. Harrer, who is that's the name of the permanent secretary, said in his evidence, and I'm quoting here, that where an application hits certain risk criteria, additional checks are undertaken, which can include requesting evidence to prove where the business is located.
I would have thought that 11,000 businesses in the space of 3 months registering to a private residential apartment in Cardiff would qualify as a risk.
Well, you might think so, Ray, but Mr. Harrer also said in his evidence that it had not happened in this case.
You mean it hadn't been identified as a risk?
No.
Well, I bet the postman noticed.
I'm sure he did. Probably off with a bad back.
Yeah.
But while it may not have been reported, I can say for certain that this was not the only flat in his apartment building that was being targeted.
You mean there was another flat in the same block that was also being used by Chinese companies?
I am saying exactly that.
That poor postman. How many at this one?
Well, it's really difficult to say for sure because there isn't, sadly, an open database of VAT registrations in the same way that there is for companies. But I can say, in the research that I've done, that the second address, the one that hasn't yet been reported, came up more frequently than the first one, which is the 11,000 companies.
Indicating that there might be more than 11,000 there then?
Well, I can't say for sure, Ray, but it is quite definitely a possibility.
And I'm going to hazard a guess that these aren't the only 2 properties in the entire UK that have been used in this way.
Do you know, I think that's an entirely reasonable supposition.
OK, so look, this is clearly a big problem, but what's going on?
Ray, of the 11,000 or so companies at this one address, Mr. Harrer told Parliament that more than 2,350 of them owed money to HMRC.
Wow. And do we know how much money?
Well, we do. We know that it is more than £500,000.
So at this one flat, £500,000 in VAT was outstanding?
Yes.
Do we know how that happened?
Well, we know that amongst the 4,500 or so letters, there were a very large number from debt collection agencies.
Which makes it look like these VAT debts go back for a little while to have got to that stage.
Well, yeah, because this is only one step before the bailiffs turn up.
And I see it was only the publicity surrounding the case that caused HMRC to call off the bailiffs and stop sending the letters.
Just that specific address, yes. But given that following a complaint to Action Fraud, which responded that it was, quotes, unable to identify a line of inquiry, unquote, I wouldn't be too optimistic that this isn't happening elsewhere.
Wow, it's hard not to agree. Do we know how these debts were being accumulated?
Well, yes, from trading on third-party platforms like Amazon or eBay or other third-party resellers.
So let's get this straight. You or I might have bought goods on, for example, Amazon. Let's say Amazon. We'll have paid the price inclusive of VAT, but that part of the purchase price was never handed over to HMRC.
Yeah, that would appear to be exactly right.
Meaning that not only am I overpaying for what I receive, but there is a shortfall in revenue, which, if the evidence is to be believed, could be a multi-million-pound figure.
Almost certainly.
Causing what you might call a double whammy of overpaid goods and a need to get increased tax revenue due to the shortfall caused by these cheats.
Well, yes, and it's actually just occurred to me that, of course, if we bought those as a business, we might reclaim the VAT that we paid on our purchase, which is not going to be paid over by the traders, causing a triple whammy. So,
yeah,
in a nutshell, yep, that's it.
And finally, it seems that just like Companies House, anyone can register for VAT anywhere they like, and there's no system to stop it happening.
It would appear so, Ray, yes.
Could things get much worse here, Graham?
Oh, well, Well, yes, they can, Ray.
Oh.
In future episodes, we need to take a look at rental scams that are operating on Facebook Marketplace and other platforms, as well as a completely different but related issue arising from UK companies selling on platforms like Amazon, eBay, and the like.
Well, just for once, Graham, I'm not entirely sure I can say this with complete conviction, but I'm kind of looking forward to it.